So recently I watched a video called Pot of Greed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where a YouTuber basically gathered up all the clips in the show where players activate Pot of Greed and explained its effects almost to ridiculous levels of redundancy, where two players will even describe what the card does in the same duel. And it kind of inspired me to make a video explaining the usefulness of draw engines and how deck building and resource management works in card games in general. This video won't necessarily be basically about Yu-Gi-Oh, but since Pot of Greed is one of the strongest draw engines that I can think of in any card game, it will probably be one of the focuses in this video. So I guess the main question here is, why is Pot of Greed so good? If you think about it, the cost, so to speak, of playing Pot of Greed is to consume the card itself. So even though you're drawing two cards, because you spend the Pot of Greed, you're only actually drawing one card. But is this effect really that good? Let's do a thought experiment and suppose that instead of Pot of Greed, there was an automatic mechanic where after you draw in your draw phase, there's a chance proportional to the cards left in your deck that you get to draw an additional card. And this mechanic can only trigger 3 times per game, to draw more parallels to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck limitations. So, is this equally as good as Pot of Greed? The answer is no, actually. Let's try to compare this using an actual game situation. Suppose we have 30 cards left in our deck and we're using our new theoretical game mechanic. So we draw one card, and then we get lucky and draw one more card. So it's as if we got a Pot of Greed. So now we have 28 cards left in our deck. Now suppose we're using Pot of Greeds in our deck instead of this draw mechanic. So we have 30 cards in our deck, and then we draw Pot of Greed and play it. So we draw 2 more cards. Including the Pot of Greed we just drew, our deck now only has 27 cards left in our deck. So some of you may now be thinking, well, alright, so Pot of Greed basically just shrinks our deck a little bit faster than our preconceived mechanic. Is it really that big of a deal? And the answer is yes, actually. Yes, it is. And to understand why, we need to understand the fundamentals of building a deck. Deck building often revolves around a balancing of generating resources and then spending those resources effectively. In Yu-Gi-Oh, there isn't really a primary resource. In Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone, we have mana, and in Vanguard Cardfight, we have Counterblast and Soul Blast. Yu-Gi-Oh's resources generally focus on paying with creatures on the field, but that's often after you've summoned the first monster, which is almost always for free. Another major component of deck building is discovering and using powerful combos, multiple cards that work very well together to create an effect much bigger than the individual cards. In Magic the Gathering, we have Painter's Servant and Grindstone. Hearthstone had the Old Force of Nature Savage Roar combo, and Great Nature in Vanguard Cardfight has Crayon Tiger comboed with any doping effect. Because we need multiple cards in hand to perform this combo, we need to be able to efficiently draw into these combo pieces so that when the time comes, we are able to do the combo when we need them. How does this relate to Pot of Greed being overpowered? Basically, the fact that it reduces your deck count a little faster means you have less cards in your deck to sift through when fishing for your combo pieces. These deck size reduction tactics are useful and commonplace enough that the term deck thinning was coined for it. Add the fact that Pot of Greed doesn't have a resource cost, and you now have one of the best draw engines to ever exist in a card game. Playing Pot of Greed in your deck is the equivalent of building a deck that only has 37 cards in it. Cards that allow you to draw in other games are often very expensive. So there you go. Deck building is about getting resources and using them efficiently, and Pot of Greed does all of these things for you in the best way possible. Happy deck building!